Hello. So let's just wait 1 minute before starting. And Karsten will be here a few minutes late anyway.
Unfortunately, I have to leave at past. Sorry.
No problem.
I might have to leave also at 5:45 my time, depending on depending on the wife, essentially.
Okay. It's a multidimensional problem.
Yeah, ultimately is the children problem.
Right. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, also considering the time constraints for Thomas, let's start the meeting then. So welcome everybody to this interim meeting of the working group. I am Marco Tiloca, my co-chairs are Jaime Jimenez and Karsten Bormann. And this is an official IETF meeting, so we've been recorded. The note well applies. Please be sure you're familiar with that. It's not just about IPR and patents, it's also in the special about our code of conduct. So be nice and professional to each other. And the agenda for today is about two documents, problem details that had a running working group last call until yesterday, and I believe we can close. And then group proxy, the ESCO also would cover about group communication with proxies. Before we start, anyone has any agenda bashing or additional item to propose?
I think Karsten had a few more slides to add to the problem details we discussed this morning, but I'm not sure because I couldn't popping up in the materials page. So
okay, yeah, there's one more set of slides. You're right, but we can start with yours, right? Those are the main ones.
Oh yeah, sure. I can.
All right.
Your overview, and then maybe Karsten can go in details and specific points.
All right, then please, Thomas, you can show the slides yourself.
Can I? Let me see.
You
want to share your screen?
It's okay.
How can I do that? Because sorry.
Well. On the top left, the second icon from the left.
Oh, I don't know left and right, Marco. Sorry.
So you know,
quite problematic.
So on the top you see the IETF logo. A little bit below, you have a few icons. So you have the hand icon. Beside it, you have a
meeting materials
paper icon. Physically beside the screen icon.
Presentation view? No.
Share preloaded slides. Is the second icon.
I don't have it.
Between
gallery view for me.
On the other side of the screen, Thomas.
Right.
It's the icon between the hand and the screen. And you should be able, that's right.
Cool, fantastic. Problem details. I suppose this is it.
There you go.
Yay. Cool. Okay, wait a second. Right, so this is the update for the concise problem details draft that went through working group last call. In fact, a cross-working group last call involving core, CBOR, and HTTP API, which seemed appropriate given the footprint of this, seemingly anodyne draft, which instead has interesting ramification. And the working group last call concluded on Tuesday, and we had a few by few, but I would say high quality feedback. Thank you, Marco, Christian, Harry, and Roberto Polli for the input. And we are addressing all the comments in one batch on the WGLC-processing branch on the repo. And if you click on that RFC-diff bit in the slides, you could see the diff between 0.3 and the work in progress at the moment. We had a parallel discussion on the tag 38 fix-up, mainly in CBOR. And just to present a refresher of the thing, the thing that we're doing here is we are extending the semantics of 38 to add the language direction, so left to right, right to left indicator to the array as an optional element. And this is, I would say, quite a bold move, because there is clearly a potential backwards compatibility problem that is introduced by the change, as any old receiver will not be able to interpret the L2R signal if included. So there was some debate between the co-authors around this on a late Friday night. And then Carsten went ahead and sent this nice email to the CBOR working group, giving the rationale for the thing. And the surprising thing for me was that we had no pushback. On the contrary, there was some appreciation for the no clutter aspects of the change. So apparently Carsten was right, which doesn't come as a surprise, but still. So we had these positive comments from Michael and Christian, and yeah, Appendix A contains the fix-ups, basically the rewrite of the registration for type 38. Yeah. So these were the two basic discussion threads we had. So shepherding is started, and Jaime has taken the lead. Thank you very much. So he started the write-up and also kicked off the IANA processing, because we have a few things there. We have a new media type, we have the associated content format, and a couple of new sub-registries for slotting the new extension points. And as of this morning, there was already HESCO providing his thumbs up on the content format registration. So we seem to be, in good shape there. But the thing is that the milestone for this is the ETAs is June 2022, which seems like a date in the future, but is in fact a week from now for shipping this to ISG. Which is quite tight, and just to be clear, the reason for this acceleration, sudden acceleration, and tight deadlines is that some documents in the 3GPP SDO have taken a dependency on problem details, on concise problem details, as well as the 7807, the unconstrained version of this work, and they plan to publish in June. So that's why we're trying to align the two. Yes, so I think next steps. Well, we need, first of all, to to decide whether we have addressed the comments in a proper way, and then submit a 04, which should be the signal to kick off AD review. But what I wanted to discuss maybe is that, given the the stringent timeline, maybe we should request error reviews in parallel to AD review instead of waiting on the output from Francesca. But this is just my 2 cents that I'm throwing in the basket. Yeah, I think that's it. That's it from me. Should I close the deck? Keep it open.
Not necessarily. Let's see if there are questions. But there's Karsten who wants to say
Yeah, I
something.
just wanted to point out that it's not us who are usually asking for error reviews, but the AD. So essentially, the next milestone is for us is to throw the thing over the fence, and then it's all Francesca's decision how to handle this. But we might very well suggest that she should request error reviews right away.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, any questions or comments on the slides we've just seen for Thomas? Because, well, I know Karsten has more details on the actual changes on the GitHub. So before getting into that, maybe there are more high-level questions. Sounds like no.
Cool.
So if that works for you, we can continue with Karsten's slides then.
Cheers.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, so we did this relatively quickly with few of the usual breaks and stops and so on we have, because we want to beat this June submission milestone. We want to do it this week. So let me quickly run through the working group last call comments and see how we handled them. So as Thomas said, this is in a branch on the repo. There are some 18 commits in this pull request, and those were essentially taken right from the discussion in the mailing list without creating individual PRs or even creating issues for them. We also have a few abbreviations that we have been using between the authors, but not in the document. So there are concise problem details, data items. These are the things that we are standardizing here. And on the slides, I will use CPDDI for that. Then we have standard problem details entries, which are one kind of entries in that data item. And we have custom problem details entry, which are the other form of entries in the map that constitutes the concise problem details data item. And the bug, of course, is that both the word concise and the word custom starts with a C. So if you hear me saying the wrong thing, I usually mean what makes sense I should be saying. Of course, much of the work was on the editorial side. So 11 of the 18 commits are editorial ones. I've listed them here if you want to cross check them. And one of them is consistently using concise problem details data item. There were some reference tweaks and so on. There was one technical nit. The entry in the registry was wrong about what can be in the standard problem detail entries 1 and 2, and we changed that. Tag 38 was already mentioned. So one thing that I added very recently is making the base direction auto explicit. In the previous version, auto was always implicit by not giving a direction. And sometimes when you want to use this tag in a more complex framework where you have something like inheritance, it makes sense to reset a default that you would have been inheriting. So this is now explicit. If you don't use that, just treat null like absent, and you will be fine. Only when you have such a more complex situation that change will make a difference. The other thing that I think is really important to understand this whole tag 38 thing is that the whole issue of how to actually handle mixed direction text is still under ongoing standardization. So for instance, there is a W3C group draft node that explains how to do this. and that's a draft. It's not yet even a technical report or something, and it's definitely not a recommendation. So we are defining this tag 38 into a landscape that is somewhat uneven, and we can't really define the meaning of this tag in all necessary detail without defining that landscape, and that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So the purpose of the tag 38 is to deliver the information that goes into those algorithms, and the algorithms will be defined elsewhere, and we cannot have normative references to them because yeah, they are not defined yet. There is a pretty good understanding between the people who are working in this space. We had a little side discussion in the Internationalization Directorate about that. I'm not a member of that, but I could get some responses from some of them. And they also see the problem that right now there seems to be a rough consensus on how to handle this, but it's not written up. So that's the space into which this tag 38 change goes. But I think it's better to be prepared for what's going on there than to be in the situation of 10 years ago. So there is some new text there that you may want to read. We actually went on and defined a term for problem shape because we earlier got rid of the problem type, which is the simplistic way of talking about what the problem is about. So the 7807 assumption is that you are in a situation where you can enumerate all your problems you might be having, and that becomes part of the interface. And that doesn't really mesh with reality. So typically, if you define an interface between two components that evolve separately, then you are finding new kinds of problems all the time. And if you want to be able to talk to other instances that may not have that new problem type in mind, then you do this in terms of problem details. And that's why we removed the problem type, apart from the fact that it's a big registration issue there, and an X dash problem because people will use URIs before they are registering things and so on. So all in all, the thing becomes both simpler and more aligned to reality, except for the few cases where you actually already have 7807 problem types. And in that case, you can simply import them from there. And we have defined a custom problem details entry with the ominous number 7807. And that is actually meant to carry this kind of information around if you have it. So that's, I think, a pretty significant editorial change explaining what we had in mind. But if the explanation before that has been so poor that you didn't quite understand what we are doing here, now it should be much more clear. Okay, so the next one is base URI. We had a discussion on the mailing list, and Christian reminded us that if we define something that can have embedded relative URI references, then we have to say what the base URI is. And usually when you use problem details in its original function where you get it back with an error response, this error response is in response to a request which determines the base URI. So usually you don't need that, but as soon as you store concise problem details data item, it's not clear that you stored the base URI with that. So we defined base URI standard problem details entry, which now has number -5, and explained how that is meant to be used. And that meshes with the response code that we already had, because that is another thing that is clear from the REST context, from the request response context, but would be lost when you store just a problem details data item. One comment that Christian just made on the list was that we really should be thinking more about what do we have to store to keep information about the response that is usually implicit in the request response context. And that's probably something we should define elsewhere, but we should provide some way to do this now in the current spec. There is some text in -2 that requires ignore unknown processing. So if you have a problem details entry that you don't know, you should be safe to just examine the other ones and make up your mind what happened from the other entries. So you can ignore unknown entries, and that's a common JSON extensibility pattern that we are just following here. And this provides forward compatibility because you can put new stuff into your problem details while you still have old systems out there that don't understand that stuff. And that's a pretty important part, for instance, of HTTP, that you can put headers in there, that header fields in there that haven't been defined before without breaking everything. If you break everything, then you are not going to do that, and then you don't have a forward compatibility path you can take. But if that is not the right choice, you can put the data in a new custom problem details entry, and that should prevent false interoperability. So the other data that also go into this custom problem details entry will not be used by old systems. So your backwards compatibility story is that new stuff that is changing the semantics of old stuff doesn't get to influence old receivers, and that's exactly what we need to achieve here. Okay, so we are not in a position to actually write up the ignore unknown principle in all details and forever. I think this is pretty much what we have to say about ignore unknown, but there is one more detail that came up in the discussion on the list. What if we are not just adding a new map key, which is easily detectable as one that you don't know, but if the data given for a map key look different from what they should? And of course, if you are using internal ignore unknown, if the data you supply for an existing map key internally have map keys that are new and you ignore them, that's already this case, but it is a special case of this case. This is one of the reasons why people who have been using validation in applications usually are very weary of the effects, because you can over-validate and by that simply block paths for doing extensibility and forward evolution. So the question is, do we need to define this part of the JSON ignore unknown pattern as well? And there is a lot of assumptions that people make. So for instance, if you have a new enum in a set of allowed values for a string, usually that new enum is not understandable. So you would expect to ignore that. If you have something that says you can have 0 to 10 boxes in that palette, and it suddenly has the number 20, then the assumption is this is not something very different, for instance, telling you that in reality this is delivered with a rocket and not on a pallet. but it just means there are now 20 boxes on that palette, and your existing domain restriction is outdated. So these are things that people who build applications in this space do intuitively, and writing up all this intuitive processing probably would take years. So I don't think we should include text on this, but we should be aware that this is something that is not really fully defined in the extensibility story of JavaScript or of JSON. Finally, we had a little detail. The slide is wrong. The bottom right character would need to be a brace, not a bracket. So there is an example for how to port the 7807 like invalid params construct out of 3GPP TS29112 to this. And the example uses an array where the JSON form uses a map. And I actually find this attractive because it allows us to demonstrate that we don't have to do this exactly in the way the JSON specification would do. So I would prefer to keep it this way, because it's much more likely that you will do this in a CBOR environment than the braces version. But of course it's a change, and it depends on the actual meaning of TS29112, whether that change would actually be desirable. But this is not an example to indicate how to do 29112 in our specification, but it's an example to show the use of custom problem details entries. And we just took the real life content of that from 29112. So I don't think we need to slavishly follow that. Okay, so I think that's a complete summary of what we changed and where that still may be controversial in some ways.
Thank you, Carsten. Any comments, questions? Thomas.
Okay, so I was not sure about the base URI being in the standard space, but the analogy with response code has made my mind converge on that. So I am okay with that. I had expressed mild doubts about sort of isolating all the type decorators that are not necessarily generated by the origin, but it can be produced on the path to the end, to the peer, including the proxy chain, into a separate map, a submap. But yeah, I think it's okay. I think it works as Carsten has described. For the rest, I have no concerns.
Good to hear. Jaime?
Yeah, on the slide 6, on the topic of the type, I don't know if Ari was in the call minutes ago. I think he left, but we were discussing it, at least with the 3PP colleagues, that what they're looking is kind of like a one-to-one mapping, like the simplest they can see. I get the point of the problem shape. I don't know if it is too late to add any more text there, but it might be that and I haven't checked the version of today, if there is changes, by the way, maybe it's already there, but it could be helpful to put more on the RFC 7807 and how the problem type could be something like a problem type could be created if we don't go for the problem type at the end of the day. Basically, the text as it was yesterday was not fully clear there. And the comments the comments I got from the 3PP guys is always like, where is type? where is type, and so on.
We have a whole Appendix B on that. So that actually mentions type.
All right, just a second. Okay, maybe I didn't have a too close look on that then. Anyway, I can take that offline. It's not a problem. And then on the, I will check the Appendix B. And then on the last item, I kind of agree with Karsten on this one. Like, it makes more sense to have the not have the array of objects. But I guess it's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's for the group to decide. So yeah, whatever the authors on the group decide on that. To me, the array actually makes more sense after reading the 3BP table.
Jaime, do you want some change in the draft for this or not? Because as Karsten has mentioned in a parallel email, this is just an example, right? So it happens to be I crafted it this way because I took the 29.112 and you know, try and work out how it would look like, but it was just, you know, a guess. So unless you want this to be, you know, the kind of blueprint for the 3GPP work, I mean.
Right. Okay, I thought that, I mean, if it's not a non-contentious issue and it's like a bike check thing, then the second one with the fixed first bracket, actually, I think that will be more clear for the people. Just you know, there's usually people 3PP just browsing the draft and they may get confused if they are seeing the example. So if it is not a problem for you, the second one actually is, let's say, more accurate to the spec. But I understood from Karsten's presentation that actually the first one would be more better fit from CBOR point of view.
Yeah, the first form is one that doesn't use any strings for identifying things, and that's what we normally would want to see in a concise problem details application. So that's a good example.
So that was my poetic license, if you will. I took the OpenAPI schema and translated it into CBOR, basically the way it is right now. But you know, knowing that you know, I was making that choice, but it seemed to me like, you know, the normal choice to do in this kind of environment. So it really depends whether you want this, you know, one-to-one parity or not, which, you know, tails into the discussion around where's type, right? There's no type.
Yeah.
We got rid of it because it was useless. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not the boss of anybody. I cannot put actionable items, and I'm kind of ambivalent as well. To me, it's a bike shed issue, but you know, if you justify the way you have done in the presentation, I think you can keep the one you like. Okay. The second one is just to clarify for 3GPP folks that are checking the spec.
Okay.
Okay, any more comments? Anyone? And Christian, by the way, confirmed in the chat that also his comments were addressed in the latest comments, I think. Jaime.
The technical issues, I would like to know more or less the timeline is for June. So how are we going to be doing this in the coming, well, in the next week or so? Like, we do in parallel, we confirmed that we check with Francesca, right? And she does the AD part in parallel. And is there anything else?
So what I would like to do is submit the version based on this pull request today and have it submitted to the ISG, well, the next possible time. I mean, tomorrow is a vacation day in much of Europe, but really Friday should be possible. And I don't think we have to wait a lot because we still have a whole IETF last call to validate, to verify that we didn't make any mistake here. So I think we can be a little bit bolder here than we usually are.
So by the way, can we have the Shepherd write up ready by Friday for that?
I think it's pretty much ready now. The current
Oh,
version.
awesome.
I will have a last look, if that's okay, on the last version on the editorial, the editor's view. I can do it today or Friday.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah, and if anybody else wants to have a look, maybe there is more comments coming. I don't know. I would just like not to get stuck on these kind of like little whether we use array or object or something like that. Like that's my hope.
Okay, and to confirm, of course, we can close the working group Rust call, which was pretty intense and successful. Thanks a lot for the good and quick work on this.
Yeah, it was actually super fast, right? Like, is there a
Well,
record here?
It became an urgent topic. So yeah, good job, everyone. Okay, if there's nothing else
I submit
please.
this the new draft within the next hour or so, and then I think we really can press the ISG submission button.
Okay. Thank you, Carsten. Okay, if there's nothing else on this document, then we can move to the next one, GroupCon Proxy, and Esko will present.
Yeah, that's right. Let's load up the slides.
Loading.
Let's see, group communications. Looks like the interface changed again for this. Okay, here they are.
Okay, it's good now. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so talk about GroupCon Proxy. Yeah, the recap is here. I'm not sure if it is actually needed for the audience there. So, but I can do a very short version. So we already discussed group communication, of course, in GroupCon Biz, and there we find issues when using a proxy in combination with group communication. And we have this draft now to address all of these issues, and that's the contribution that we make. You get more of the details of in the coming slides, basically. I think we repeat a couple of these things sometimes. So in the figure on the right, you can see an example situation. So the black arrows come first. So it's a request that the client makes to the proxy. Proxy performs the group communication requests, and then unicast responses are sent back by the servers and then collected by the proxy and sent back to the original client. So what we defined for this, here there was a problem for how long the proxy should wait to collect and then forward these responses. So we addressed that with a new co-op option, Multicast Timeout. And that option is also removed by the proxy. So the servers don't have to do anything with that. And also the proxy adds something to a response. So this is an option, response forwarding. So that's basically used to indicate to the client that the responses are coming from different servers, and there's some information about these servers in there. And that information can be used to later, for example, do more operations on that server, for example, contact it again. We also define how group OSCORE can be used for security, also for the situation that there's a proxy in between. And yeah, we also have a pointer here to another draft, so the OSCORE capable proxies draft. And that has more details on the security between the client and proxy if you use OSCORE. So you get a kind of OSCORE within OSCORE type of security in that case. So that's the short summary of what the topics, what we address here. Now I'm going to talk about updates since the last version that was presented. So that was version 5. This was an interim presentation. And we did already earlier submit a version 6 before the IETF meeting, but this wasn't presented yet. So first change is for the multicast timeout option. Well, the name has changed. So it used to be multicast signaling. So this is now updated to be more specific to the purpose of what it does. So it sets basically timeout for the proxy. The length of the uint that's used in seconds is now 4 bytes. And we also made updates for the response forwarding option. So there's some changes in the semantics of the port number. So basically the proxy will provide back information related to the port number of the server. And yeah, now it can be represented in a more compact form, basically. So it can be a null, or it can be completely absent. So in that case, the data element is completely left out from the CBOR array. So for null, we have the semantics now that it's basically the same port as the destination port number that was used in the group request. And absent means that it's the default port number for the transport protocol that was used in the group request. So currently this will be 5683 because we only define the co-op scheme for multicast group requests. But this can be, of course, for other schemes, it can be used in the same way in the future. So then the second slide with the changes. So we've provided more details of the processing, what happens on a reverse proxy. So there's a section now on that. And in this case, you can see a reverse proxy can act as if it's what is an origin server. So and it can be specific to an application domain as well. So in that case, it's logical that it could have a default timeout as well. So the proxy basically determines its timeout for accepting the responses to a request. And in that case, the client can also omit the multicast timeout option. So when it omits that, it means, okay, it will use the default timeout, which is determined by the proxy. And of course, to make things work properly, ideally, the client also needs to be aware of this timeout, of this default configuration. That's, yeah, of course, useful that it knows how long it will have to wait for responses coming back, or how long responses can potentially come back. And this should be okay in that situation, because the proxy is expected to apply security and authentication of clients so that it will, they will have a relationship set up and configured. So that same relationship can be used to also make sure that the client is aware of this situation. Yeah, we put some notes in there so that this is not final text here, but placeholder notes regarding response revalidation. So there is basically revalidation can take place between a proxy and servers, and in combination with group or score. So this is a particular situation that can happen, although doing this requires the use of cacheable OSCORE. So there's also a pointer to that document. Otherwise, you cannot even revalidate such protected messages. So we have, basically put a note in there, and I'm not sure, Marco, is there any further details you want to say about this?
Not at the moment. We can come back on that later if there are questions.
Yeah, we can discuss it if there are questions, yeah. So then the final slide for the updates that were made. There was a new example added regarding a reverse proxy. So we have that in the appendix. And this is a bit different than the existing examples we had now. So this requires one basically address at the proxy, so an IP address. In the past examples where things were done in a different way, you could have like something like one address per group in this case, or you need an address per server in the group. And this is of course less scalable because you need lots of IP addresses. So now we have a proxy residing at one IP address, and the request target is expressed within the URI path, and it uses the format from RFC 8075. Actually, we have now Thomas also on the call, so he was one of the co-authors of that. And yeah, this makes it more scalable because it uses one address. I'm not sure if people can read the text here. I actually hardly can read it in the example, but maybe it's only on my side. It basically embeds the complete URI, the group URI, in the URI path. That's basically the approach that's being used. So other updates we have made are to consider HTTP to co-op reverse proxies. So that's in section 9.10. And there's also to-do placeholder notes there discussing, that you can have streamed delivery of responses. So the client talks to the proxy in HTTP, and then you can use the streaming using the transfer coding chunks. You can basically send the chunk each time a co-op response comes in to the group request. You can send it back to the client. So we studied that a bit, and it turns out to be doable, but we have not made the final text there. I think it would be good to have final text here together with an example. And of course,
we have Karsten in the queue.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering when you use transfer coding chunk, how you actually delimit the responses from each other.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there was, I think, various options discussed for that. I was trying to remember what we used for that.
Use a long string and pray?
No, that wasn't it.
The problem is that you might have an HTTP proxy that rejuggles your transfer coding chunk, so you cannot rely on the chunks, the chunk boundaries making it to you. So you have to have something in there that actually provides the delimiting. I mean, that there are obvious ways of doing that, but you have to choose one.
Yeah, I think you meant what you suggest is that there's another HTTP to HTTP proxy basically in front of
Yes.
the one we are describing, and that could have its own way of processing, of course, the chunks.
I think that's already addressed in the draft version because it says that those come along as multi-part messages, and those are just kind of
good.
And,
Okay.
and the chunking may happen along the multi-part boundaries or not.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Multi-part boundaries are where you have to pick a long string and pray.
Yeah, it's a multi-part mixed basically. So you can have different types of responses as the parts of the multi-part response. All right. Then also clarifications were done, editorial improvements as usual. And moving to the next slide. So there's a sort of summary slide we have here of the current features at a glance. So little bit of repetition here, but we have basically solved the issues as highlighted in the core group COM-BIS. There's the signaling protocol that we started with. And we basically deal with caching of responses at the proxy in this draft. And there's basically two types of response validation that can happen in that context. That's also addressed. It's maybe good to note that the one revalidation between the client and the proxy, we have a new co-op option for that. So that's the group e-tag. So it's kind of a validation of an entire group response at once. And there are other issues that we found, but noted that those could best be handled in other drafts. So like group combis, for example, defines all the caching of the responses at the client itself, and validation between the client and servers. So that's why we mainly focus here on what does the caching. What is the caching that the proxy itself has to do, or are there special rules for that when our entries invalidated, etc. And we consider now not only the forward proxies but also reverse proxies, so that was added later on, and also the HTTP to co-op case is considered, as well as chains of proxies, so multiple basically multiple proxies that can be chained together. So we have a couple of relations to other documents. So that was already pointed out in the presentation. So you see a few links, but there are more. So there's the document draft Borman core responses, also about considering non-traditional responses to a co-op request. So basically, we are in this case, of course. So we have a client making a single request to the proxy and then getting multiple responses back. So this is kind of one case of that. And here we have the multicast timeout option to basically provide a time indication to the proxy. So how long should it collect? And basically there's the draft OSCORE capable of proxies. So that's basically also sharing the same use case that we outline in this document. And this goes more into detail about the security. So you have OSCORE between client and proxy, and also group OSCORE is end-to-end, so between client and servers. And let's see. Finally, we have some points here at the bottom of the slide. So as said, we addressed the issues from group combis, and now basically this draft is providing solutions to that. And now Karsten provided a working group last call review of group combis, also pointing out to the relation between these documents. So we basically point to the present document from group combis to address these proxy issues. And so we also refer to the group com proxy document. So Karsten's point was, well, we should at least have maybe accepted this as a working group document before we can proceed with group combis here. And that means that we accept that part of the problems will be addressed in this document and not in group combis. So then maybe look at the next steps. So there's a couple of things we still want to do here. So there's an alignment that can be made with terminology and concepts, specifically from the core responses draft. And in the options now, we use basically to indicate the address and port, etc. of the server. We use a custom format, but we found that CRIs can also be used for that as a maybe more standard way of including that addressing information. So that's something we are considering to add next. One thing is cancellation. So this is not considered yet, but should it be handy if clients have a way to stop the proxy? So if it's collecting for a particular time, is there also a way to cancel that? So before the timeout expires, clients might be able to stop that processing. Still need to think about that, I think. And of course, the part I mentioned, the text for HTTP to core proxies, that is not yet complete, just a placeholder. We need to work on that as well. And while we do that for HTTP to co-op, we can also add security considerations that are specific to the GroupCom case, because those were not yet in RFC 8705. Okay, I see the queue is filling up, so let's start with Richard.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make kind of a general comment that I've been following the work on this draft, and I'm also actually working on an implementation where I'm trying to set up a forward proxy that can forward a unicast request from a client to multiple servers using using multicast, according to how things are defined in this document. And I've come part of the way for that implementation, and this is also based on the work I've been doing in the Californium Co-op library, where I have also worked on OSCORE and Group OSCORE support. So as a further step, I want to enable on this proxy also Group OSCORE between the proxy and the servers. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that as a piece of information.
Okay,
thank you.
Very good news, I think. So if you have further input, of course, to this document, then we're happy to look at that.
Of course, definitely, yeah.
Okay, and then Christian.
Yeah, thanks for this. I have 2 points I'd like to come back to. Could you go to slide 5?
Yep.
Yeah, I gotta admit I missed the -05 version, so this was rather new to me. I don't think that having a default on a reverse proxy is such a good idea, because a reverse proxy might not need much custom configuration by the client, because that's just how reverse proxies are set up. The client may not even be aware that this is a reverse proxy, and typically is not. So I think this should be more a matter of negotiation and possibly advertisement that these resources there there might be multicast behind it, so that the client would send a multicast timeout. Because if the server sends multiple responses and the client did not ask for them, then this is asking for token disagreement. So the clients might use shorter tokens on requests where they expect the response to be sufficient, and longer tokens for observations and that like. So if these things get out of sync, I think that's problematic. So I think it's better to think about advertisement here rather than defaults. And Marco, I wrote some of this up already, so you don't have to type it down again.
Yeah, so it's like well, default is maybe not the right word then. It's like timeout determined by the proxy. Kind of.
No, yeah. Even then, if it's like, if the proxy sends multiple responses, even though the client didn't ask for it, I think that's problematic. So if a request comes into a multicast proxy, then the safer thing might be to say, yeah, sorry, there is no single answer, or anything that like, and not to just send multiple responses. And I think Carsten's +1 on the chat was meant for this comment.
Yeah, I think I must say I don't fully understand this, because what we have here is not just a random client going to a random resource and expecting one response. So this is more like
it's a reverse proxy. You can't be sure. From the client's point of view, it looks like a regular server, and that's the point of a reverse proxy, that it appears like a regular server.
Yeah, and that's what we basically want to enable. So it looks like a regular server, but the client in this case knows already it's not a regular server.
No, why would it? It's a reverse proxy. It didn't say anywhere that it's odd.
I think
No,
that
why would it have to say that? I mean, maybe it uses a particular, particular resource structure that is determined by an application or application ecosystem. And
I think
yeah,
the
that
problem
definitely,
that Christian and I are having is the same thing. You cannot really make the workings of the state machine of the protocol depend on context information that may be unevenly distributed. The specific thing that woke me up here was that Christian mentioned token retirement. And if I send a request to someone and get a response, then I might want to reuse that token. But if I'm still waiting for more responses to my original request, that's not so great. So I really need to know whether what I just did is going to get me one response or multiple responses.
yeah, that's maybe you're thinking on the protocol level, so it's kind of, you can say maybe it's independent from what application resources are being used. The client, let's say the co-op client at the protocol level must be generating the right tokens as well, and then and we don't want to run possible risk that this co-op client is unaware of let's say the group.com proxy draft and then uses the wrong token, for example. Yeah, so in that case, what it could do, is it acceptable if it would include the option but without a value, let's say? So it's like saying to the proxy, you choose. I think that could be still an option. Then a client may not know necessarily at the co-op level, it doesn't know how long it will receive responses, and that maybe doesn't matter at the co-op level. So at the application level, it will know how long responses will be coming in, because it's some kind of default that has been agreed for that resource, for the application context. So that could be still
one might certainly consider having some value that indicates undefined, but again, this might go through proxies in between, and if that's information from the application, then that information is not available to other proxies on the path. So I think it's better to be explicit here.
Yeah, that's basically for the chain case. You're saying that if the information is included, then the chain can properly process that and keep the state for exactly that time as indicated, right? So, yeah, I think that does seem like in general the safest approach. If you consider all kinds of possible use cases and then deployments with chains and.
If a reverse proxy receives a request that doesn't have a multicast timeout, there is still there are still different options, and those will depend on the configuration of the proxy. So that might be something like, sorry, show an error because and just tell them in plain text that, sorry, this is you have to be multicast, or I can't tell you something. This might be the multicast might really be more of an anycast, and it might be in this particular application, which is configured for the reverse proxy, okay to just send whatever comes first, or do something more application specific.
Yeah, so it can be a whole range of things actually. And that's the application specific part, also the reverse proxy kind of for implementation specific part.
Setting up a reverse proxy always needs, at least to some extent, knowledge of are these things going to work through a reverse proxy. So whoever sets up a reverse proxy, in my opinion, needs to have a rough idea of the application. But it might suffice to have that rough idea. And if I may follow up with the second comment, unless you want to, that's on page 6.
Yeah, now we go to that.
Could you elaborate a bit on why the address gets packed into the? I mean, I know I understood this 8075 construction to be relevant really for cases where a proxy doesn't work like a protocol-independent proxy as we have it in co-op, but just like an HTTP proxy that can only work with HTTP URIs. So that gets crammed. So the address gets crammed into the path. What's the problem here really? Because we also have the URI host, so the request could indicate the group in the URI host and then come back from any resource.
Yeah, that's basically thinking about you could use the forward proxy for that, right? Is that maybe?
No, you can have a URI host option even in both in a forward and a reverse case. So especially in the reverse case, that server could sit on one IP address, but have all its groups advertised as different names, which all resolve to that address. And when the request gets sent there, the request contains the URI host option, which then the reverse proxy translates to whatever the multicast or any cast or broadcast address on that medium is, which really depends on that precise reverse proxy, but the information on the requested group is already available, can already be available in the URI host option.
Ooh, yeah, I'm wondering about that because we had similar discussions before in Group ComBiz about using the URI host option for particular things. Yeah, I think you do run into a problem then with the co-op URI encoding and decoding process. So because if you follow
maybe let's revisit that offline. But I'm pretty confident that URI host is the right place here, and that if you start cramming things up into the URI path option, then things like relative reference resolution in responses get really weird.
Okay, but I would like to see indeed how the URI host option could be used there. So that would be good to check. So maybe that's something for the list discussion. Do you think that's good to have? You can send a comment by mail, for example. Then we'll be interested in that.
And just to finalize my comments, none of that should stand in the way of a working group adoption, which in my opinion is really due for this document, and it's a good thing to have this around. And what we just talked about are details.
Yeah, okay, that's can be worked on then in that case. Yeah, I agree. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, if there are no other technical comments, Christian took anticipated a little bit what I was going to say. So I watched the conversation, and these all look like things where we are doing the usual tweaks that a working group does when working on a working group document. And it seems that we do agree on the fundamental approach that this specification is taking. And it also looks to me that we do have energy for working on this. So I think all the prerequisites to doing working group adoption call are there. And are we waiting for anything specific with a working group adoption call, or should we simply do that now?
Yeah, I'm not waiting for anything specific now. And now there is indeed still energy now. So let's hope after Group ComBiz we still have that energy left. Well, let's see. That depends.
Good. Marco is a co-author, and the other co-chair Jaime has dropped out, so maybe we cannot answer that question right now. But I think the chairs should look at this question and decide whether to do a working group adoption call very soon.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, that also was the last point of the slide here, and that's the conclusion of the presentation.
Thank you, Esko.
Yeah.
Just to be sure, any other comments on this document? Okay, then we get into AUB territory. Yeah, I just wanted to make a reminder that we actually have another document in Working Group Last Call. The original plan was until today. It's conditional attributes. But as far as I could see, there's only my own review on the list that I sent yesterday. So we clearly need more feedback before closing the Working Group Last Call and proceeding. And well, if you have read the document, please provide your feedback on the list, preferably in the next couple of weeks. And even saying that you are fine with it as is valuable feedback. If you haven't read the document yet, that's a good time. Okay, so there's anything, of course, don't forget to bring a towel.
Ah.
Thanks, Kristen, for another reminder. Is there anything else you want to discuss about core today? If no, I think we can adjourn the meeting and talk to you in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you then.
Bye.